Now we will see all the movement terminologies. The first movement terminology is called flexion and extension. Flexion basically means a reduction of the angle at a joint. So if this is a joint, if the angle reduces at a joint, we call this flexion. And if the angle were to increase at a joint, we call this extension. And mind you, this flexion and extension is a terminology which is only used with respect to the sagittal plane. So sagittal plane means you are looking at the person from the side, and these movements are clearly happening front and back. So remember, whenever reduction of the angle in a sagittal plane, especially if the movement is front and back, we call that flexion. If there's an increase of angle, it's called extension. Like we call this first movement as neck flexion and extension. When the neck is coming down, we call it neck flexion. If it is going back, it's called neck extension. Similarly, this here, if you lift your hand up, it's called shoulder flexion. If you were to bring it down, it's called shoulder extension. And if you were to do this, like say a bicep curl, it's called elbow flexion, and the opposite is called elbow extension. Similarly, this here is called wrist flexion. If you were to move it opposite, it's called wrist extension. If you were to lift the entire leg up like this, it's called hip flexion. If you were to bring it down, it's called hip extension. This here is called knee extension because there's an increase of the angle when you take it up. When you come down, it's called knee flexion. So that is the movement, the flexion and extension is the movement which is happening at the sagittal plane. Next, we have the frontal plane. In the frontal plane, the first movement that you get to see is abduction and adduction. Abduction means moving away. So if you were to lift your hand up like this is called shoulder abduction. If you were to bring it down, it's called shoulder adduction. And this is happening in the frontal plane. Similarly, if you were to lift your leg up like this is called hip abduction. If you were to bring it down like this, it's called hip adduction. Here, if you were to move your fingers out like this is called digit abduction. If you were to bring it closer, it's called digit adduction. And all of these are happening in the frontal plane. In the frontal plane, we have another movement which takes place, which is called lateral flexion. Lateral flexion is basically the midline either bending to the left side or the right side. Like this here is called neck lateral flexion. This, what you're seeing here, is trunk lateral flexion, like what we do with side bend exercise. That's the trunk lateral flexion. Next movement in the frontal plane is inversion and eversion, and this is only with respect to the foot. So what's an inversion? Inversion is when the bottom side of the foot, that means the plantar side of the foot, is coming towards the midline. That's inversion. And if the plantar side of the foot is moving away from the midline, it's called eversion. So those are the movements which are possible in the frontal plane. So in the transverse plane, the first movement that you get to see, even before this one, in the transverse plane that you get to see is rotation. So rotation is where you have an axis like this on which something is rotating. Like we say, this is neck rotation. If I were to move my neck like this, if I were to do like a wood shop, that would be the trunk rotation. That's the first movement which is possible. Next, we have the palm supination and pronation. Supination is where the palm faces up. Pronation is where the palm faces down. We can also have an external or internal rotation. So what is an internal rotation? This only happens at the hip and the shoulder because of the ball and socket joint. When the ball of the shoulder or the hip rotates inwards, like what they're showing you here, we call this internal rotation, which is also called medial rotation. And if the opposite happens, where the ball of the shoulder or the hip is rotating outwards, we call this external rotation. There's another movement which is called as horizontal flexion and horizontal extension, where if I were to move my hand like that, right? If I were to move my hand like so, let me just show you. If I were to move my hand like that, this would be called shoulder horizontal flexion. also called as shoulder horizontal adduction. If I were to move it out like this, it's called shoulder horizontal extension, which is also called as shoulder horizontal abduction. So those were the movements which are possible at the uh, in the horizontal plane or the transverse plane. So if we were to summarize this in the sagittal plane, we can have only flexion, and the opposite of flexion is extension. Next, we have frontal plane, and in the frontal plane, we can have adduction and abduction. We can have lateral flexion, and we can have, with respect to the foot, inversion and eversion. And in the horizontal plane or the transverse plane, we can have rotation, exclusive rotation. We can have internal rotation, and the opposite of internal rotation is external rotation. Then we can have horizontal, instead of writing horizontal, okay, horizontal flexion, and the opposite would be horizontal extension. Um, we can also have supination and pronation at the transverse plane. Next, we have the multiplanar movement, which is circumduction. Circumduction is a mixture of flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, or basically any two plane movements combined together, we get a circumduction. What is a circumduction? Is basically forming a conical path like this. So it's like a cone. The movement is like a cone for you. So these are the movements, and circumduction is a multiplanar movement. Those are the movement terminologies that you need to know.